Item number 6, informational report presentation, and I'll go ahead. We have a co-housing presentation of Tom Kuhn and Michael Jacob. I want to welcome them here. Served on the Planning Commission with Michael, and appreciated that. And appreciate your knowledge and you guys being here. And fast, Carrie, go ahead and bring us up to date on what this is about.
Sure. So this is a presentation on Cohousing, which is a pretty unique housing model that we have in Sebastopol, as well as some other communities. I know Berkeley has a couple of these types, and I'm sure part of that will be part of the presentation tonight. This is actually the first of a few, you can almost call this spring lecture series in a way, a few presentations on different housing models and from types of housing through funding that actually Kate Haug has helped us put together, contacting the speakers, and we'll have a couple of presentations coming up. I see we do have a number of folks in the audience here for this presentation today, I suspect. And so we will try to get a list of those on the website soon so that you can see what they all are. But very pleased to have Tom Kuhn and Michael Jacob here tonight. Kate, I don't know if you want to say a few words at all.
Just like to welcome our presenters tonight, and I look forward to hearing your presentation. And I will reserve my questions until after you've given us your presentation and presented your materials. Thank you so much for taking the time for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us. It looks like Michael's not here yet. I've just sent him a text, so hopefully he'll get it. He might have been thinking we wouldn't be on until 7:30. Any rate, my part of the presentation is first, and if he doesn't make it in time, I'll wing it. Okay, so let me go to sharing. Let's see. Share screen, and there we are. Okay, can you see my slide? Co-housing for Sebastopol Planning Commission, is that up?
No.
I think I'm sharing.
You're not.
All right. Well, let me try
Tom,
again.
just so you know, Michael has just joined the meeting too.
Yeah, I see him there. Okay. Oh, I didn't hit this button here. How's that? Now you can probably see it.
There we go. Yep.
All right. I missed one button. Okay. Just gonna try and make this full screen. There we go. All right. So, so yeah, we're here to present on co-housing. And first thing I just wanted to mention was that, you know, neither Michael nor I are experts or consultants on co-housing. We just have a lot of experience with it here and happen to live here in Sebastopol. And of course, Michael served on the Planning Commission, as somebody mentioned recently. So hopefully we have a good perspective on the kinds of things you want to know. And so we're going to go through these slides and expect to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So we'll kind of ask you to hold questions if you could till the end, and then we'll go through that. So first of all, what is co-housing? I'm just going to give you guys a chance to read this so you don't have to listen to me drone on. Okay, so those are just a couple of the common definitions of it. Here's a photo of where we live here at Acre Wood. We're on Robinson Road, in case you don't know. As the previous slide mentions, homes clustered around common space. So this is our plaza here. Just to the right, that corner sticking out is part of our common house. And then if from this point of view you did a 180, you would see the other half of the community down below. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the key elements next. So we have, as we say, shared spaces. Homes are typically clustered away from parking. So there are some architectural features that promote co-housing, promote community, whether or not there's co-housing. Thought to promote community. One is having parking removed so that people get to see their neighbors walking by all the time, and they're more likely to have casual interactions going to and from their cars. Typically, they're self-governed. Typically, co-housing does not have shared common beliefs. By that we mean they're not religious in nature. There are, of course, religious communities. They're not really considered co-housing, although there is a lot of overlap in how they work. Shared communal and environmental values at the beginning are inspirational, but this doesn't mean there's no conflict. And I kind of want to emphasize that it doesn't mean there's no conflict because, well, we'll get into that a little bit more. But an analogy I like to tell people is that, it took me a long time to find a life partner and someone with whom I feel I share a lot of values, and yet, of course, there's still conflict, and we work through it, and hopefully come out stronger. And so far, that's been true. And here at 2 Acre Wood, we have 14 households, and we didn't work quite as hard to select each other as we did our life partners, and so yeah, there's certainly some opportunity for conflict there. No shared economic connections with neighbors. By this, we mean there's no sharing of income, as is common. My understanding is that's common on kibbutzes in Israel, or originally, I'm not sure it still is, in certain communes. But typically, co-housing does not have that. Although we here at 2 Acre Wood have a homeowners association, of course, we have HOA dues like any other. So we do have that economic connection, but it's not the same as sharing income. Typically, a non-hierarchical structure employing consensus decision-making model is common. So the consensus part is really important. It's not majority. So one person can hold up a decision, and this is what forces interaction and community and, of course, conflict. So that's a really thought to be a really important part of it. Typically, co-housing is structured as an HOA with either condo ownership agreement or fee simple ownership deeds. Here's another shot of 2 Acre Wood, just sort of a small plaza we have down at the other end of the property where some people gathered. Obviously, this is after the pandemic started. This musical family here is giving a little bit of music to the rest of us while others are standing and sitting aside and listening.
That was Denise's 65th birthday.
Oops.
It was celebrating the dragon.
Let me go back up there. What was that, Michael? Oh, that was at the at Denise's birthday. Yeah. I wasn't there that day. I don't know what I was doing, so I missed it. Okay. So a brief history of co-housing in the U.S. Of course, co-op apartments were in New York City going way back. Chuck Durrett and Katie McCammett brought the concept from Denmark, which started there in the 60s. And the first new co-housing community was Muir Commons in Davis, California. And Davis had another community kind of come together in the 80s, N Street. And that was just done by single-family homes removing the fences behind their yards. So today there's about 160 completed co-housing neighborhoods in 25 states with 125 to 150 in some stage of construction or development. We're going to talk a little bit about the steps next, but there are a lot of steps, and I would say it's a fair bet that not all of those 125 to 150 will come to fruition. It's a lot of work and a lot of effort, so it's just important to recognize that. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention on the second bullet, Chuck Durrett and Katie McCammett. I think they both consulted on Petaluma Avenue Homes here in Sebastopol, which is an affordable co-housing rental community built by Satellite Affordable Housing Associates in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so here are, this is per cohousing.org, the steps to creating co-housing. And they actually give, if you go to that website, they give a description for each of these. And you can see there's a lot of steps here. And as I mentioned below, the underlined items are typically needed for any non-cohousing development. So any commercial developer will, need to manage and do all of these things that are underlined, but cohousing have these extra steps. So forming a group and deciding as a group what to do and growing that to the number of people you needed and establishing the relationships and bolstering those relationships and working through all the conflict even before you've done some of the things like hired a contractor. That can be very difficult, and in those early stages, our community did have a lot of turnover. So Mike will probably get into that a little bit more later. Let's see here, is there anything else? Yeah, okay. Typically, co-housing communities are future resident-driven developments who hire professionals. That's what we did here at 2 Acre Wood. Michael's going to talk a little bit more about those details. Less common is a developer-driven development, which is what Sequoia Village is here in Sebastopol. It was done by Burbank Housing. I was working as a project manager at Burbank Housing during construction and managed the project during the construction phase at Sequoia Village. Also, Sebastopol Petaluma Avenue Homes was built by a developer, of course, Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, as I mentioned. That's rental housing. And Yulupa Co-Housing in Santa Rosa was also done by a developer. I should mention, I was going to mention it in the next slide. Let's see here. Yeah. So, whoops. Did I skip something here? I'm going to back up. There was supposed to be a picture here, I thought. It's the next one. Sorry. Back up here. So we're going to talk through a little bit of the details of Sequoia Village and 2 Acre Wood. I'm going to talk about Sequoia Village, and Michael's going to talk about 2 Acre Wood. At Sequoia Village was formed, it was initiated by a partnership between Michael Black, who's an architect and a very strong proponent of co-housing here in Sonoma County, by the city of Sebastopol and Burbank Housing in order to create affordable co-housing community. Burbank did this as a self-help construction project and managed the construction and as well as the design and entitlements and all of that. There is an HOA there with fee simple deed ownership of lots, including an equal share of the common property. And that community, when Burbank sold the homes, was established or was set up with a property management company to handle the property management by Burbank Housing. The reason that's mentioned specifically here is we may get into this, well, I'll get into it a little bit here now. There are a number of reasons why co-housing communities sometimes, I don't have a better word for it, fizzle out, where even after everybody moves in, things sort of stop happening and people stop sharing meals together and doing many of the things that are very common in co-housing. And there's probably a lot of reasons why. I've certainly done no studies. Every co-housing community is different. And, there's probably as many reasons why people participate and not as there are people. But if you kind of have a critical mass of people not participating, they have a tendency to fizzle. And one of the things that kind of is a forcing factor, I believe, and this is just my opinion, is having a self-managed HOA, which is what 2 Acre Wood has. And I believe Sequoia Village is still using a property management company, but I haven't really kept in touch with her. There may be others in the audience who know. But and then another factor that can lend support to co-housing actually happening is having some of that community space and common building or a kitchen where people can share meals. We know of communities that don't have that have kind of fizzled out. And then also it is, I think, probably very difficult to sustain a vigorous co-housing community in a rental property because people just don't have the investment typically. So I've heard only rumors that the Petaluma Avenue homes, there isn't that much in the way of co-housing community happening. I could be wrong about that, or things may have changed. I heard that many years ago, so I don't know how that's going now. Okay, so here's a picture of us at 2 Acre Wood when we first moved in, or yeah, probably when we very first moved in. You can see this woman here is pregnant, and that child is now is going to turn 22 later this year. So this is a pretty old photo. It's notable that there's very little turnover in 2 Acre Wood. There are 14 households. Only 3 of those 14 are not of the original owners. So so it's pretty small turnover for over 20 years to have only 3 houses turnover. The other thing I was going to point out is here in white, seated toward the left of the picture, is Michael Black. He also was the architect for this community and lived here in the early years. And he left here because he had an opportunity to move in at Yalupa Co-Housing, where he was also involved. I mentioned him earlier. He was also involved with Sequoia Village and several other co-housing communities throughout the state. I know he was involved in one in Chico as well. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is it. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Michael to talk about 2 Acre Wood and some of the other things for the rest of the slides. And Michael, just let me know when you want me to flip to the next one.
Okay. As Tom mentioned, 2 Acre Wood was a resident-driven development. My wife Denise and I got involved in 1994, and it took a couple of years before we were able to sign a option agreement on the 2 acres that are here on Robinson Road. And I think we closed it like on Halloween in 1996. And I think that the lay of the land is not that different 20 years ago than it is now. There's not a lot of open properties in town in which you could do a co-housing development of our size. And at 14 homes, 2 Acre Wood is on the small side. I think that average of the 150 or 200 communities that are in the United States is probably closer to 25 or even 30 homes. And that's just not going to happen here in Sebastopol. Doesn't mean that you're not going to have an effective community, but it does. It is a factor. And it took us then almost 3 years between the time that we closed on an option to be able to get entitlements through the town. Richard Spittler was working with us at first before Kenyon took over halfway through our project. And go back one if you would. And yeah, thanks. So at the time, the way that this project moved forward is we used the planned community, the PC zoning on this property. At the time, I think it was already zoned as a 6 lot per acre. Probably back then it was like an R3 or an R2, I don't remember exactly. And because there was low income provisions to be able to get another lot per acre, if you did a deed restricted situation, we worked with Burbank Housing and created 2 of our lots as deed restricted low income. And at the time, of course, there was redevelopment funds through the city before the state yanked all that away. But that was very helpful to get us up to 7 per acre, which allowed us to have 14 families move in. And again, we did do a fee simple 0 lot line. So it's pretty vanilla in terms of how we structured it with the Department of Real Estate, with an HOA and CC&Rs, and we wanted it to look as normal as possible for the lenders. It was new, there weren't that many projects around, and we were not a hippie commune. We were a bunch of middle-class folks looking to just have a more collective lifestyle in an intentional neighborhood. And as I don't know, we didn't put a site plan on here, did we? Yeah. But as Tom mentioned earlier, the parking, which is pretty common for multifamily, the parking is separate, and there is kind of a joke, but it's real, that when you leave your house to get in your car to go somewhere, you better factor in 5 or 10 extra minutes, because you're often stopped on the way to your car and have these impromptu conversations. The other thing about the design of the site is all the homes' kitchens face out, so that if you're in your kitchen, you're looking out, and if people are walking by, they can see you. And it does help foster that bit of social interaction and social connection. We wish that this was 5 acres. Well, actually, we wished it was 100 acres, because the 100-acre wood was the inspiration of 2-acre wood. But 100 acres was definitely not going to happen. You can give me the next. So as Tom mentioned, we're a self-managed homeowner association. And I think the benefit of living in a small community is being able to manage your community and your affairs, and not, we still delegate, but we're not delegating out to some management company. And often we're looking for what is the social glue that holds a community together, that makes it more interesting and more and foster commitment and connection. And so the business of operating a small development is part of that. Let's see. We did about the PEC zoning. It's something that has actually been around for a while. When the general plan was updated, I don't think that was anything that was changed. And I think it was fortunate that we had that ability to work with that 20 years ago under the prior general plan and zoning ordinances. So we were able to create what worked for us on this long, narrow lot. We don't have a site plan to show you, but if many of you have come by our community, you know that there's duplex, triplex townhomes. So we share 1 or 2 walls with our neighbors. And we, as much as possible, we created our side yard setbacks to be relatively small also, just to give us as much community space as possible. And so there's a small wooded area in the back, a large community space in the center next door, which is a big garden. And a lot of the trees and whatnot that we have in our landscaping occurs on a pathway leading up through the buildings. Give me the next slide. So because you're the Planning Commission, we thought we would mention just briefly a little bit about the general plan and the zoning code, at least as far as I remember it from when I was on the Planning Commission. So the general plan does include mention and support of co-housing in the housing section. The town was wanting to make sure that the city supported community developments like co-housing, and it's mentioned specifically. And as I said, the zoning code has PUD, a PC zoning, which I think is very helpful when it comes to something like this. And one thing that I suggest is the design review board has design guidelines, and I haven't looked at those in an awful long time, but it would be interesting to see if they have or could include community or co-housing site design ideas incorporated into them. And I know that in talking with Kenyon in the past, that if someone comes in saying they'd like to develop, whether it's a single family or a duplex, let alone a larger development, that they say, there are design guidelines that can help you see what it is that the city of Sebastopol encourages. And so I think it would be helpful to include what is included in the zoning code, such as the PC zoning, in a hand as well, so that someone who is an architect or a developer looking to create some type of community development is helped along the way. You don't have to read through the entire zoning code to figure out what might benefit them. And then the next slide, Tom, the next slide is just a few things that I wanted to mention in terms of having the Planning Commission and the City Council support the future development, more community, more co-housing. And as you know, we're a tough town to develop in. As I said, there's limited availability of appropriate parcels. Construction has been, cost of construction has been high, and it's only getting more difficult all the time. Definitely with the fires in the last 3 or 4 years, that's made it even more difficult. And when it comes to building multifamily, even in areas where it's zoned multifamily, there is, at least our experience was here on Robinson Road, and in the other parcel that we're considering purchasing that we didn't get before we bought this one, neighborhood resistance to multifamily is pretty strong in town. And so it's important to be able to look at ways to diffuse that. The next slide. So I think this is our last bit of talking points before we open it up for questions. There was a request. I think the city will pay for a certain for a feasibility study to be done on some city-owned parking lot land in the middle of town. It was right south of Hot Monk. And I don't think that ever moved forward, but I think that in terms of looking at possible approaches to creating more communities, to me, mixed use, especially if the city already owns the land, and the downtown core is a viable option if it can get through the steps that it takes, expecting there's going to be a lot of resistance to change. But in the zoning code right now, there's 4-story if there's residential in downtown core. So there's a lot of room for a denser downtown to incorporate more residential, and that could have community built into it. I think that definitely in bigger cities around the country, there's been um, there's been successful communities built that don't look like 2 Acre Wood. And this last one I know is probably the least likely, but I just thought I'd throw it out there is when we were developing 2 Acre Wood, we really wanted that larger parcel where we would cluster homes in a small piece of it and then have a lot of open space around it. And that is never going to happen in the county, but it could conceivably happen if some properties that are in the sphere of influence now were incorporated into the city and there was reasonable access to city services, where you could have a dense community, but based on the size of it, the density of homes per acre might fit the zoning. It's possible. I know it's something we looked at and didn't really find. Tom, if you have anything else to add, I think that kind of wraps up our discussion. I'm hoping that we hit some of the topics that you were interested in. And of course, it's we're available for as long as you want to talk about this more. So thank you for the opportunity.
Michael, thank you for being here. I miss you being on the commission.
Thank you.
Questions for either of our presenters? Good, Paul.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. It's nice to see you, Tom and Michael. But yeah, I had some questions. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to, you mentioned kind of neighborhood opposition and things like that. I'm just wondering if you could speak maybe a little bit to your, things that you ran into it through your entitlement process, that either neighborhood opposition sort of things, or if there was anything that you felt the city could have done better to make it easier to make it, get through that process.
Well, I know when we looked at a parcel at the high point of Jewel Avenue back in '97, and at the time it was a 5-acre lot with a farmhouse on it, and it was zoned medium density residential, I think. At the time it was zoned like at least 6 lots to the acre, maybe even a little higher. It could have been 6 to 8 or 6 to 10. I don't really remember. But I know that in the middle of doing that, working with the city council, they were probably influenced, I'm sure, by some of the neighbors, but they actually reduced the density right in the middle of our tentative application. We didn't really even get so far as to do that, because it wouldn't have worked if we couldn't gotten at least 6 parcels, 6 units per acre. And so, I think there's a different willingness, I believe, in the Planning Commission Council now. I think it's just politically it was different 20 years ago. But I do think that in seeing how developers have struggled to put anything together in town that isn't just a single family residence or maybe a duplex, anything larger than that is met with a huge amount of resistance. And I think that our experience of building multifamily has been positive for the residents who live in it. And I believe if you look at asked people around Robin Road in our area, they would also say they weren't too clear and they were nervous at first, but I think they feel that 2 Acre Wood is a benefit to the community, not just the larger town, but our individual little neighborhood. So I'm not quite sure how to address that, but I think that multifamily can be seen as a benefit, not just it's bringing down property values to those that have a single family residence within striking distance.
Yeah, I was kind of curious.
On
I ask you about that as well. Just I was kind of curious what your neighbors think of you, 20 years later. If they realized you weren't as
Yeah.
scary as they thought you might have been.
Right. We made an agreement with the town not to let our community space be used as a rental and as a gathering. But we do open it up for things like postcard writing and parties, and we've definitely had a number of gatherings around here that support our local street and neighborhood, and people appreciate that.
At Sequoia Village, I wasn't involved with the project during entitlement, so I didn't get to witness much of the opposition. But I did have to go back. We ended up selling those homes right after the 2008 crash of property values. And so I did have to go back to city council to request some changes to the financial assistance from the city, which was granted, which is great. But somebody got up to speak in support, and they said, and by that time Sequoia Village was for the most part built out. It wasn't completely done, but it was nearly done, and people hadn't moved in yet. And this person got up and spoke and said, I spoke against the project, a year or two ago, whenever it was. But now that I see it and I've met some of the families, I really think it's a good thing, and I'm really glad it's here. And, so he kind of retracted his statement. That was just one anecdote, but
No, I think those things
Paul,
are important.
One other thought I wanted to mention was both Sonoma and Napa and American Canyon have put in income projects on city land. In fact, American Canyon did a homeless community that opened 2 years ago on about 3 acres. And it was I think Chuck Durrett, McCammon and Durrett, they were the architects on that one. And the American Canyon had land, and they put it out as RFP, and they got like 28 developers to pitch it, and they picked that one. And I've seen it, not in person, but I've seen photos of it. And it's really nice. And we know that there's a huge demand, a huge need for meeting ABAG goals for very low and moderate income housing. And of course, there's a huge demand for homeless, transitional housing, which is what that was. So, we're not quite in the same, we don't have quite the opportunity because we don't have the open fields, green fields. But.
Do you feel that there's there's some cost benefit to this kind of development versus, a non-co-housing arrangement development?
Well, I think that co-housing probably costs a little more per square foot than a comparable sized project that would be developer driven as a condo or townhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because in a small townhouse development of 14 units, you wouldn't see a 2,200 square foot common house. It wouldn't do that. So we're amortizing that in. And there's a lot more space that's just community space that you probably wouldn't see. And I haven't done a recent look, but I think some of our homes are probably larger, and we've got more unit types than you normally see. There's 4 unit types at Acre Wood in just 14 homes. And a developer probably wouldn't do that. On the other hand, if you look at the resale value, we are higher per square foot resale values than a comparable townhouse or condo product. So it pencils out because of that.
Do you think that you mentioned, you could only get, 14 units on your 2 acres. Do you think I know there's definitely a cost analysis that would have to be done, but just in terms of the community side, like what would be kind of the minimum number of units you'd want to, expect to see in a co-housing development to make the community aspect work well?
I bet Tom has a different idea about that than I do. If you want to give your shot at it.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure what your answer is, but I think we're close to the low end. I would want to say, 10 maybe. It depends a lot on the commitment of the people. If it were a community similar to 2 Acre Wood, where the future owners are the ones doing the development, that would be a sure sign of strong commitment, and that would feel better. If it were, and so I'd feel more comfortable, going smaller that way. Bigger would be better, however, and because then you're more likely to have that core of totally committed folks that would be involved. And yeah, of course, there's always economies of scale as you go larger. I'm sure there's a top end. I don't know what it is. So, yeah.
Well, there are Sebastopol co-housing in Oakland, I think has 6 homes on a
Oh.
very small lot. And they actually even have a common house too. It's not so big. So socially, it's easier when there's more people because if a couple of families pull away because love happened and there's less people to generate that mix of interaction. And okay, with 1 or 2, it's a small group, then it's more difficult. If there's 30, of course, it's a lot easier, which is more energy, more people that can do more things. But I don't think size is a limiting factor. It could be small, it could be medium.
Yeah, I would agree. In any group of households at any given time, there's a certain number of them that are going through some kind of a crisis, right? We've had deaths, we've had divorces, and we've had, long-term illness, and people get older, and so on and so forth. And when those things happen, people aren't able to participate as fully. And if you have a larger group, you can kind of absorb that and think, okay, well, the Smiths are maybe they've got this going on and they can't do anything can't do much in the next year or two, but we know they contributed a lot back in the early years, and probably they'll come back around once they get through, whatever this is. So there's that kind of thing to consider too. If you have 6 households and, even one of them is going through, say, a divorce, that could be, pretty difficult on the whole community.
My last question had you, Michael, you mentioned, the idea of a downtown, co-housing, mixed use kind of project. How would you see something like that coming together? I mean, do you see like the city trying to actively do that with a developer, or do you see it would be better if a group of people came together to propose something like that? Or do you have any opinion about how best to move an idea like that forward?
Well, I think that because you have this ability to build vertically in the downtown core, whether it's on bare dirt like a parking lot that the city already owns, where the city could put an RFP out, or it's a property that has a building already, but maybe there's some extra land next to it. I know the downtown charter campus, that was an opportunity that it's still possible in my mind, where you could build a podium and park underneath it and go up 4 floors and create something on a site like that. And it wouldn't be a public-private partnership because it would be all done privately.
Yeah.
But if the city had a real strong interest in supporting it, of course, that would be helpful, because there's parking issues and plenty of other things that the city could do to support a development like that, because it would be pretty difficult to make it work financially. And I think especially for a senior complex where the parking is already reduced, if it was a seniors project, I think that, that could have some legs if there were people that were committed to be able to do that. And we're becoming senior co-housing just because we've all aged to that age. We didn't start that way.
Well, most of us, not all.
Well, right. You will never get old. But we have 3 new families that just moved in that are, I think, 40 and under. So that's great. It makes a difference.
How did you find the original families? How did you all come together for this?
People brought in people. We put out a lot of, we put the word out just in circles, and we got quite a bit of free publicity in some of the local papers. And there were a lot of people swirling around. It was sort of like a whirlpool. People would swirl into the middle and would either find the gravity kept them there, or they had too much magical thinking going on and thought they could, get a house without being able to afford it, or just the value system that they had didn't match. And some people stayed close even who didn't move in, and ended up joining our meal club, because we do 2 meals not during COVID, but we would do 2 meals a week. And there were people that that joined a meal club and came and ate with us, and they never did move in, but they were part of our original group. So, but we did have a significant amount of outreach during those first couple of years, and that wasn't the problem. Getting families interested was not the problem.
In that group photo that I showed, there was probably 3 households in that photo that actually never did live here, but we know them and they come around pretty regularly, not during COVID times, but so yeah.
Okay. Other questions from commissioners?
This is Commissioner Howe. I have a question. I'm wondering in a vertical, more urban model, how the community spaces would function if it were in a downtown location with less community space that was outdoor driven.
Well, I can give you an example of the one that I was actually looking at in the very early feasibility phases. There was a concept of having a 4-story terraced building, so it stepped back. Everybody had a small terrace that looked out into the center core that was common. There was a common area and a big deck above the parking, so that would be on the 2nd floor. That had a reasonable amount of light hitting it because the way the building stepped back and it was sort of open to the south. And then the idea would be to probably have an elevator so that it could also meet the needs of people as they aged and could be ADA accessible. And that would be urban, but the downtown of even Sebastopol is urban if you're going to put residents in it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that sounds like it could be a lovely arrangement. And I know in New York City, there's many apartment buildings that are based around courtyards, which provide community space and also light into the unit. And my other question is, it sounds like the financing for this traditional financing where each person finances their own portion of the development. So each person, in 2 Acre Wood, each person financing 1/14 of the total construction and land cost. Is that correct?
When we first set it up, we created an LLC. So everybody became a member of the LLC, and there was a buy-in to be able to build enough equity so that we could get a commercial lender to come in. So I think we've got an 80-20, loan to value ratio commercial loan on the construction loan. And then once we were built, then everybody took out their own mortgage and we paid off the construction loan that way. So we were all in bed together in a sense because we were all members of the same development corporation.
And then the low income units were priced. How did you structure the financing for the low income units? Did you receive monies from the state to offset that, or?
That was the city of Sebastopol had a redevelopment agency at the time. So they funded a silent second and the, what was it? Burbank Housing was the third party that managed that. And I assume they still do because those two properties are still under that.
Well, I think the way I think that worked, Burbank helped draft the documents. The city holds the deed restriction, city of Sebastopol, and should one of those households decide to sell, the city, I think, this is the way Burbank normally structures this with their properties. The city can go wherever they want to administer their affordable housing program, and they used to have a sort of an agreement with Burbank Housing, and they may still. I retired from Burbank a few years ago, so I'm not up to date. But so the city could go, with whoever, to administer that sale, and there's probably terms around first right of refusal and that sort of thing in order to assure that that those homes stay in the affordable inventory and continue to count toward affordable numbers for the city.
But if when the sell, the city will get their silent second back, I believe.
Yeah.
I have a question as far as, is there a lot of, how's the turnover in families? And then I would imagine it's kind of a careful consideration both ways. I mean, someone coming in to buy the house has to kind of keep in mind it's kind of a closer community versus, buying into a neighborhood as an example where you might have a little bit more privacy. How does that work?
It is something you have to be a little careful about from both sides of it. One is you want to make sure a new buyer understands what's going on. And so as part of the disclosure for the sale, request that the seller's required to, of course, to disclose not only the CCRs and so on but those are pretty boilerplate, but also the agreements. Through the years of community meetings, we've come up with a lot of agreements about things like how often we cook and where we park and how we can and cannot use the common house and all these things. And so the expectation is that the buyer kind of self-selects by spending time with that. It's very easy and risky to fall afoul of real estate, fair housing rules. So you have to be pretty careful around that. And you can't pick and choose just based on who you think you'll like necessarily, because that is very undefendable if something should go to court there. So you really have to, have a sale process that looks pretty normal on the surface, and then hope that the households that are looking at that to purchase that home do it with open eyes and understand what they're getting into. And we try to do things to make that easy so that, prospective buyers. We had one house sell here within the last 6 months. And we try to make sure the prospective buyers have a good idea of, you know, how often we meet and what the expectations are of participation and that sort of thing.
Thank you. I don't know if we have any other questions. If not, Carrie, is this something we generally open for public comment, or is this just more informational?
So I think there may be folks here who have questions for them, so we would traditionally open it for public
Okay.
comment.
So I will open for public comment, and just if you have questions, you can address those questions, and then we will answer them at the end. Just the way that these meetings are supposed to be run, it's not really set up to go back and forth. So you have 3 minutes. You can have 3 minutes and either make a comment, or if you have a question, we'll make sure that your question is addressed whenever all the public comments are done. All right. So if you need to go ahead and raise your hand, or virtually or physically.
And you can also, if you don't know how to do either of those, use the chat function to let us know that you would like to ask a question or make a comment. And Chair Fernandez, I did not receive any written communications on this item.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Don't see any right at this point. Okay, great. Well, that means that you guys thoroughly covered all of the subject very well. So really appreciate you guys taking time out to be here and kind of educate us on that process, and appreciate the insight, and hopefully something to think about.